There's just something about us humans and the sea, some sense of harmony or belonging. And while most of us are content to wade in the tides of this feeling, others need to go deeper into its depths to find out what's there and try to satisfy this mysterious yearning. Jacques Mayol is one of these people, and in 1988 a dreamy French film about his life premiered in Europe. The Big Blue sold out daily in France for an entire summer. It was a cultural phenomenon. And yet the critics at Cannes, they hated the picture. Because on its surface, it's about two ostensibly self-absorbed characters, Jacques Mayol and Enzo Molinari, who engage in a dangerous competition about who can dive the deepest in a single breath.
Who won?
Won what? The asshole award? Let me tell you, it was a tie. Acting like a pair of 2-year-olds.
But I think that these critics give a shallow reading of the film, because clearly something touched the audiences and myself more deeply. What appears like reckless diving into the Big Blue is actually a metaphor for diving into oneself. And what the film is about for me is that Jacques' journey toward the bottom of the sea, toward the sea inside. Well, if he's not careful about it, he's going to fall into a deep black void and might get lost forever. We're introduced to Jacques as a man adrift in a world that feels foreign to him. He often appears isolated in the frame, he's uncomfortable in basic human interactions, and sometimes doesn't even feel comfortable walking on land.
He looks strange, doesn't he? Like a baby who just learned to walk.
Johanna, a claims adjuster who met Jacques at a research station, develops an infatuation with him, prompting Enzo to warn her.
What is it, Johanna? You're so crazy about him, you don't see the truth. Don't think of Jacques as a human being. He's from another world.
But what is Jacques' world? Well, from what we can gather, it's one that's defined by a lack of human connection. It began in his childhood when Jacques' mother left his family and his father drowned in a scuba diving accident while harvesting shellfish. His only remaining family is his uncle Louis, who seems somewhat aloof. Jacques is therefore left with essentially no familial roots and develops an alienation from the human world and himself, ending up a nomad in his adult life, moving from place to place, always searching for some unreachable elsewhere. His only constant is freediving and swimming in the sea, which provides an at-homeness that eludes him on land. That's his world, the oceanic one. But is this world his home? After all, we can only visit the sea. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger postulates that our being at home in the world is not necessarily a physical place or shelter, but an existential dwelling, an internal harmony of being at home in one's existence. For Jacques, the ocean is a place that can momentarily generate this feeling within him, a sense of belonging and aliveness. In fact, the real Jacques Mayol describes his diving experience as losing the notion of time, space, and perhaps even pain, bringing me closer to the sublime state of soul in which I can identify with a universal consciousness. He also feels this way with dolphins, who seem to reciprocate with him as well. However, a troubling fact remains. Jacques is human, and he expresses sorrow over his internal longing for human connection when he returns to shore.
That's my family. What kind of man has such a family?
So that's Jacques' conundrum. He's just so attached to the sea that when he comes back to the surface, back to the human world, he's just lost. But maybe if Jacques can somehow find out why he's drawn to the sea in the first place, he can begin to try to solve this apparent problem. Now, the real Jacques Mayol, he rejects what would probably be the most obvious understanding, that he simply dives down into the deep to avoid childhood trauma. But Jacques actually proposes a different explanation, and it's a fascinating one, and one that we can explore now.
I sincerely believe that man is somehow related to the diving mammals, who, like us, are warm-blooded and who have to hold their breath to go underwater.
In fact, Jacques goes deeper in his book, Homo Delphinus, the dolphin and man, suggesting that humans and dolphins share a common energetic origin and hints at an evolutionary drive that pulls him down into the depths. Now, this is where it gets a little strange. Jacques Mayol really believed in a fascinating hypothesis from English marine biologist Alistair Hardy called the aquatic ape hypothesis. To briefly preface this, it's generally thought, and perhaps truly, that the origin of life on this planet is the sea, and that humanity's most ancient ancestor may be found there. And then the first organisms or animals left the sea, maybe to flee predators and pursue opportunities on land. But it's no picnic up here either. Spiders, tigers, politics, and there's this idea that maybe millions of years ago that African apes were fleeing predators on land, or maybe a drought, and so they actually returned to water, or maybe an underground cave. And in the aquatic ape hypothesis, it suggested our ancestors continued their evolution there, in at least a semi-aquatic habitat, before once again fully returning to land. Speculative evidence supports this, like how we have subcutaneous fat underneath our skin. That's only common in other sea mammals. Modern apes, they don't have that. We also lost our fur and have webbed fingers. The list goes on. Jacques was so interested in this hypothesis that he loaned himself out for experimentation to show how one can awaken man's dormant aquatic abilities.
Listen to his heartbeat. I can't believe that. All the blood is concentrated in his brain. It doesn't even feed his limbs anymore. That's a phenomenon that's only been observed in whales and dolphins until now.
Before Jacques and Enzo's freediving exploits, physiologists asserted that there was an imaginary wall in the ocean, 50 meters deep, and anyone that passed through this wall would be met with certain death. The pressure, too great, they said. But Jacques and Enzo blasted through that scientific barrier, reaching depths of more than 100 meters. Jacques, for one, attributed this accomplishment not only to his learned physical adaptations, but through a spiritual approach rooted in yoga and Zen that released his mind from scientific limitations and allowed the sea to receive him with open arms. Like man, dolphins are a descendant of land mammals that returned to the sea. But unlike us, they stayed there. But Jacques believes that a kinship developed while we were in the sea together, and he wrestles with his internal urge to return to his ancestral home with his ancestral companions. So even though Jacques knows why he goes to the bottom of the sea, that knowledge doesn't really seem to help him. He just goes anyway. He seems to prefer it there. And maybe it's just what he knows, and it's the only place he knows where and how to exist.
The hardest thing is when you're at the bottom.
Why?
Because you have to find a good reason to come back up. And I have a hard time finding one.
Now, obviously, Jacques' romanticization of the sea blinds him to a number of facts, including that an interested Johanna is right in front of him and offers him a potential path back to the human world. But it takes Enzo to clue him in on this.
Dolphins are the only ones who don't feel very good sometimes.
Following Enzo's advice, Jacques sees a chance to be with Johanna, but after finally connecting with her, he's beckoned by a dolphin, and he goes swimming off with her instead. Johanna is left alone and neglected. Is this Jacques' idea of personal freedom? Or is the ocean becoming a sort of heavenly prison for him from his human responsibilities? Johanna even jumps into the water just for a chance to communicate with him on his level.
Can we talk here?
And while she talks to him about her world and her hopes for a house, kids, everything, well, Jacques, he just moves in the water like a dolphin and disappears into the blue. An exasperated Johanna should probably give up, but her illusions with Jacques are almost as strong as his are with the ocean.
Jack!
But what takes us to the film's climax and influences Jacques' final decision about which world to choose is when Enzo attempts to break Jacques' diving record and blacks out by diving too deep into the ocean. He lays dying in Jacques' arms.
You were right.
About what?
It's much better down there. It's a better place.
Enzo's death pushes Jacques over the edge of what he can manage on land. The next time he falls asleep, he appears to be in a pleasant dream of dolphins swimming in the sea, his paradise. And yet this dream seems to be killing him because Johanna finds him like this. For Jacques, the question isn't whether he dove too deep like Enzo, but whether he's in too deep with his infatuation with the ocean. In any case, it takes over his entire being, and he sets off toward the sea. It killed his father, his closest friend, and it's destroying his chance at a human family. And yet he needs to dive into it, as if somehow the ocean will speak to him and provide him answers. But all he says to Johanna is,
I've got to go and see.
See what? There's nothing to see, Jacques. It's dark down there, it's cold. You'll be alone. And I'm here. I'm real. I exist.
but does she actually exist to Jacques? The ocean is now his reality. She is now the dream of something he will never fully reach. Jacques confuses his own emptiness for the vastness of the sea. He once told Johanna a story about mermaids.
Do you know what you're supposed to do to meet a mermaid? You go down to the bottom of the sea, where the water isn't even blue anymore.
The sky's only a memory. And you float there, in the silence. And you decide that you'll die for them. Only then do they start coming out. They come, and they greet you, and they judge the love you have for them. If it's pure, they'll be with you. And take you away forever.
I like that story.
But what greets Jacques is not a mermaid, but a dolphin. Now, usually when dolphins go to die, they swim away from the pod to die alone. But here, Jacques accepts the dolphin's company. Is it here to save him from himself? Dolphins are known to rescue people, like from shipwrecks, and raise them to the surface. Or is Jacques swimming home now, into the big blackness? The ocean is the only thing that could make him feel his existence. Until he exists no more.